The night was cruel, colder than anything she had ever felt before. The alien girl wrapped her thin arms around her body, but her clothes were already torn and useless against the sharp wind. Snow fell in heavy sheets, each flake like ice cutting into her skin. Her legs trembled as she walked, her breath coming out in weak clouds of steam. Every step forward felt like dragging a heavy stone, and she was not sure if her body would last until morning. She whispered to herself in her own language, trying to keep her spirit alive, but even her voice cracked from the freezing air. She had been abandoned long ago, left to wander with no home and no family. On her world, there were no warm beds for someone like her, no place at the fire, no gentle arms to hold her. She was born different, half-blood, and that made her a stain in the eyes of her people. Every door had been shut in her face, and every night she had learned to survive in the open, beneath stars that did not care if she lived or died. But tonight was worse. Tonight felt like the end. The storm was not going to forgive her. Her feet sank into the snow, wet and numb. She could not even feel her toes anymore. Her lips had turned blue, her hands stiff like frozen wood. She tried to walk faster, but the icy ground betrayed her and she stumbled, falling to her knees. Pain shot through her legs, but the cold was so deep that even pain felt distant, like something happening to another body. She wanted to close her eyes and let the snow cover her. It would be easy. So easy to just stop here, to let the cold take her forever. But then she saw it. Far away, hidden behind a group of frozen trees, a faint glow flickered in the dark. A warm light. It was not the cold silver of the moon or the harsh glare of alien ships. It was something soft, golden, alive. Her heart skipped. She blinked again and again, afraid that the cold was making her see illusions. But no, it was real. A cabin stood in the distance, its windows glowing with firelight. She could almost smell the wood burning, almost feel the warmth on her skin. Her body screamed at her to move. She forced herself to stand, her weak legs trembling as she leaned forward, dragging herself toward the glow. The storm pushed against her, as if the world itself wanted to stop her. But she fought. Every step was agony, every breath like swallowing knives, but she could not stop now. Not when there was hope. As she moved closer, she noticed something strange. This was no alien home. The shape of the cabin was foreign, built from rough wood and stone, strong and simple. Her eyes widened as realization struck her. It was human. A human shelter, belonging to the one species that her people had taught her to fear. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, too different to trust. All her life, she had been warned, never go near them. But tonight, her body did not care about warnings. Tonight, survival was louder than fear. The wind howled louder as if mocking her choice. Her vision blurred, the world spinning with each step. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat slowing, weaker than before. If she stopped now, the storm would bury her. Her only chance was that cabin. Human enemy or not, it was warmth, and warmth meant life. She reached the wooden steps and nearly collapsed. Her knees hit the frozen ground. Her fingers clawed at the wooden door. She pressed her cheek against the rough surface, desperate to feel even the smallest trace of heat from inside. Nothing came. The wood was cold, but beyond it she could hear faint sounds, movement, the creak of footsteps. Someone was inside. Her heart pounded. She should turn back. If a human saw her, they might kill her, or worse. But she had no strength to run, no place to return to. The storm outside was a sure death. Inside was a chance, maybe slim, but still a chance. With the last of her strength, she raised her hand and knocked. The sound was weak, almost lost to the wind, but it was all she could give. Silence followed. She waited, trembling, her ears straining to hear anything. Then came another sound, the sharp scrape of wood, the click of a lock turning. Her chest tightened. The door creaked open, spilling a thin line of golden light into the snow. It was so warm that even from the doorway she could feel it, like a soft touch on her frozen skin. Her eyes filled with tears. A figure stood there, tall and broad, his face shadowed by the firelight behind him. A human. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, his hand resting near something at his side, maybe a weapon. His breath was steady, cautious, the breath of a soldier trained never to trust. She shivered harder, not only from the cold, but from fear. If he closed the door, she was dead. If he let her in, she might still live. The human said nothing at first. He only stared as if trying to understand what she was and why she stood on his doorstep half frozen. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her throat was dry, her voice broken by the cold. All she could do was whisper one small plea, a sound almost lost in the storm. Her eyes begged for mercy, begged for a chance. The wind pushed harder at her back, snowflakes stinging her skin like tiny knives. She clung to the edge of the doorframe, her legs too weak to carry her anymore. For one long, heavy moment, the human's eyes locked with hers. It felt like time stopped, like the world held its breath to see what choice he would make. And in that silence, between the frozen night and the firelight, the fate of two strangers, an abandoned alien girl and a cautious human, hung by a single thread. The knock was so soft that at first he thought it was the wind. The human soldier sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, his ears trained to the storm outside. But then it came again, a faint tap-tap, too steady to be snow or branches. His body stiffened. Out here, far from cities, no one should be knocking on his door in the middle of the night. He slid the knife back into its sheath and moved quietly, his hand resting on the rifle leaning against the wall. Years of war had taught him one thing: never ignore small sounds in the dark. The third knock was weaker, almost desperate. He reached the door and pressed his palm against the cold wood. Someone was out there. He inhaled deeply, then unlatched the lock with slow care, the sound echoing in the silence of the cabin. When he pulled the door open, the cold rushed in like a living beast, wrapping around him, biting at his skin. And there, in the middle of the storm, stood a figure he did not expect. She was small, wrapped in rags that were more holes than cloth. Her lips were blue, her skin pale, her body shaking as if it would break apart at any second. Her eyes, wide and shimmering in the light, looked up at him with fear and something else, pleading. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps, fogging in the air between them. For a moment, he almost thought she was just a lost traveler. But then his eyes caught the shape of her ears, too long and sharp for any human. And her skin carried a faint shimmer under the firelight, not the texture of his kind. Alien. His heart slammed in his chest. Every instinct screamed danger. His commanders had repeated it again and again. Never trust them. Never let them close. They were the enemy, the reason soldiers like him slept with one eye open. And yet, as he watched her shivering body, as he saw her hand clutch the doorframe just to keep herself from collapsing, the word enemy felt empty. She looked nothing like the proud warriors he had fought on the battlefield. She looked broken, frozen, one breath away from death. He tightened his grip on the rifle, not raising it, but keeping it ready. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, firm, the kind of voice that carried authority. But the girl only blinked at him, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak. A faint sound came out, weak and cracked, but he could not understand her language. She tried again, but the wind swallowed her words, leaving behind only a soft whimper. The soldier's jaw clenched. Letting her in could be suicide. She could be bait, part of a trap, leading him into some clever plan. He imagined alien soldiers waiting outside, hidden in the snow, ready to storm his cabin the moment he lowered his guard. He looked past her into the storm, scanning the white landscape for shadows, for movement. Nothing. Only snow, only wind. He looked back at her. Her knees buckled and she dropped forward, barely catching herself with trembling hands. She was too weak to stand. She pressed her forehead against the wooden doorframe, her body shaking harder, her breath shallow. He had seen men die in war. He had seen cold take lives before. She was seconds away from slipping into that same silence. His heart warred with his head. Logic told him to shut the door, to save himself. But something else whispered louder. A memory of his younger sister, years ago, coughing in the cold winter night before he joined the army. How helpless he had felt then, how he had wished someone stronger, someone braver, had come to their aid. Looking at the alien girl now, he felt the same helplessness, except this time he had the power to choose. Her eyes lifted slowly, heavy with exhaustion, and met his again. This time they spoke louder than her weak voice ever could. They begged, they pleaded, not for mercy, not even for safety, just warmth, just a chance to live until morning. His fingers tightened around the rifle one last time, then loosened. He exhaled sharply, his breath clouding the air between them. "Get in," he muttered, stepping aside. She hesitated at first, as if she could not believe what she heard. Her eyes widened, and she blinked against the snowflakes clinging to her lashes. Then, gathering the last of her strength, she stumbled forward. The warmth from the cabin hit her like a wave, washing over her frozen skin. Her body sagged the moment she crossed the threshold, her legs giving out, and she nearly collapsed on the floor. The soldier caught her by the arm, steadying her. Her skin was like ice under his grip, so cold it burned. He guided her toward the fire, watching as her body curled into itself, desperate to absorb the heat. She huddled close to the flames, stretching her trembling fingers out, as if the fire was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He kept his distance, leaning against the wall, his rifle still within reach. His eyes never left her, tracking every movement, every breath. He did not trust her. He could not trust her. But he also could not deny the truth. Without him, she would have died outside his door tonight. The storm howled outside, louder than before, but the cabin was quiet. Only the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of her shallow breathing filled the space. She turned her head slowly, looking at him through the orange glow of the flames. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but nothing clear came out. Yet somehow, without a translator, without shared language, he understood what her eyes were saying. "Thank you." The soldier turned his gaze back to the fire, but his thoughts were restless. He had just broken the unspoken rule of survival. He had let an alien into his home, and though she was small, weak, and frozen, he knew that one choice had changed everything. Tonight was no longer just a stormy night in an empty cabin. Tonight was the beginning of something he could not yet name. Something dangerous. Something impossible. And yet, as he watched her shiver less and less, her body relaxing inch by inch in the fire's warmth, a strange thought came to him. For the first time in months, maybe years, his cabin did not feel completely empty. She sat close to the fire, her body still shaking, though not as violently as before. The warmth touched her skin like something unfamiliar, something she had never owned. Her eyes stayed fixed on the flames, almost hypnotized, as if afraid that if she blinked, the fire would vanish and the cold would return. She held the blanket tight around her shoulders, the rough fabric scratching her skin. But she did not care. For the first time in her life, she was not out in the snow, not abandoned in the dark. The human soldier watched her silently from the other side of the room. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him, his knife still at his belt. He had not lowered his guard. His eyes followed her every move, sharp and calculating, ready for the smallest hint of trickery. But what he saw instead was not an enemy soldier or a spy. What he saw was a fragile figure, more like a starving child than a threat. The way her hands trembled, the way her breath shook when she exhaled, this was not someone who had come to fight. She tried to lift the cup of water he had given her earlier, but her fingers were stiff, and it nearly slipped. Quickly, he stepped forward, catching it before it spilled. Their hands touched for a second, and he felt how cold she still was, her skin like frozen stone. Without thinking, he muttered, "You won't survive the night like this." Her eyes lifted to his face, confused. She didn't understand his words, but she could sense the tone. She tilted her head slightly, watching his mouth move, her alien eyes filled with uncertainty. He sighed, realizing that language was still a wall between them. Still, his actions would speak louder. He looked at the fire, then at the narrow bed in the corner of the cabin. It was small, barely enough for one man, stuffed with rough furs and blankets. It was the warmest place here, far warmer than sitting on the wooden floor near the flames. He had always slept there alone, with his weapons nearby and the cold pressing against the cabin walls. Now, looking at her shivering body, he knew the truth. If she stayed on the floor, she would freeze before dawn. He picked up another blanket and walked toward her. She stiffened as he approached, her body instinctively pulling back, as if expecting a strike. He noticed the fear in her eyes, the way her lips parted like she was ready to beg. Slowly, without sudden movement, he laid the blanket over her shoulders and gestured toward the bed. Her head snapped toward it, her eyes widening. The bed? He was offering her the bed? In her world, no one had ever offered her such a thing. She had been raised knowing she was less, knowing she was not worthy of comfort or kindness. Even her own people had cast her out, leaving her to sleep in alleys or in the snow. To be invited to something as precious as a bed, it felt impossible. She shook her head at first, clutching the blanket tighter. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe he wanted her to step into a trap. Humans were strange, dangerous, unpredictable. She could not understand why he would share something so personal with her. But then she saw his face. There was no anger, no cruel smile. His eyes were serious, steady, but not hostile. He pointed again, his hand open, showing he meant no harm. His voice, though she could not understand the words, was calm. "The bed is warm. You'll die out here." Her throat tightened. She looked at the bed again. The thought of lying down, of being wrapped in furs, of sleeping without the cold stabbing her body, almost made her cry. Still, she hesitated. Her pride, her fear, her confusion, all tangled together. The soldier noticed her struggle. To show her he meant what he offered, he stepped away from the bed and dragged a chair across the floor. He set it near the fire, then sat down on it, resting his rifle against his knee. He leaned back, folding his arms, making it clear. The bed was not for him tonight. It was for her. Her chest ached. She had never been trusted like this. She had never been given something without being asked to pay for it. Her people had never seen her as anything but a mistake. And now, this stranger, this human, was giving her warmth, safety, and a place she could not even dream of. She moved slowly, like a frightened animal, standing on weak legs. Every step toward the bed felt heavy, unreal. She turned once to glance at him, but he only nodded, his eyes already drifting back to the fire. She lowered herself onto the furs, the softness wrapping around her body. The warmth spread through her limbs instantly, almost painful at first, because her body had forgotten what true comfort felt like. Tears burned in her eyes, but she hid her face against the blanket, not wanting him to see. She listened to the sound of the fire, the storm raging outside, and the steady breathing of the soldier in his chair. For the first time in her life, she was not lying on cold ground or fighting for a place to rest. For the first time, she was in a bed, warm, safe, even if only for one night. The soldier, still sitting upright, glanced at her once more. Her body had stopped trembling so violently. Her breathing was softer now, her shoulders sinking deeper into the furs. He exhaled, rubbing his tired eyes. He knew he had just broken every rule drilled into him as a soldier. Trusting an alien was dangerous, foolish, maybe even suicidal. But watching her sleep, curled up like someone who had never known peace, he could not regret it. She was not the enemy tonight. She was just a lost soul who had found her way to his door. And though he told himself he would stay awake, guarding against any danger, a strange thought crept into his mind. Maybe, just maybe, the war between their kinds did not matter in this cabin. Maybe survival, warmth, and a bed to share were stronger than orders and rules. The fire crackled, the storm roared outside, but inside the cabin, the night was different. A fragile trust had been born, wrapped in blankets and silence. And it was only the beginning of a story neither of them had expected. The fire burned low, painting the cabin walls with soft orange light. The storm outside had not rested, its howls shaking the wooden roof, but inside was calm. The alien girl lay on the bed, her body buried deep in the furs. For the first time in her memory, her bones were not rattling from cold. She could still feel the sting of the icy wind in her skin, but now the warmth slowly spread, soothing her like invisible hands. Every breath she took was heavy with comfort, something she had never known. Her eyes fluttered shut, but her heart did not let her rest easily. She knew this was dangerous. To trust a human, to lie in his bed, it went against everything she had been taught. Her people had warned her that humans were wild, unpredictable, brutal. And yet, here she was, wrapped in safety that came not from her own kind, but from the very being she was told to fear. Her heart thumped faster every time her gaze flickered toward him. He was not sleeping. He sat in a chair close to the fire, his arms crossed, his rifle resting against his leg. His eyes glowed faintly from the firelight, steady, alert. Even when he looked tired, his presence felt like stone, solid, unshakable. The warmth of the bed made her body relax against her will, but her mind kept whispering questions. Why had he let her in? Why did he not shut the door in her face? Why was she still breathing under his roof? The questions tangled in her thoughts until sleep pulled at her like heavy chains. But even in that warmth, fear crept in. What if he changed his mind during the night? What if kindness was only a mask and cruelty waited when the lights went out? The soldier sat quietly, listening to the rhythm of the storm, the crackle of the fire, and her soft, uneven breathing. He had fought battles, faced enemies with weapons drawn, but this silence was heavier than any battlefield. He could not rest. His training screamed at him, never trust. Yet each time his eyes moved to her, curled up like a wounded creature, his chest tightened with something he could not name. He thought of his comrades, men who would laugh at him for what he had done. They would call him a fool, weak, reckless. To them, she was the enemy, no matter how helpless she looked. But he could not see an enemy when she shivered in his bed, clinging to life with fragile hands. She was not holding a weapon. She was not fighting. She was simply surviving, like him. Hours passed. The storm showed no mercy, its voice loud against the cabin walls. The fire began to fade, and the room grew colder. He leaned forward, feeding another log into the flames, the sparks rising high before sinking back into quiet embers. The sound made her stir. She shifted under the blankets, her eyes opening just slightly. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Fear surged in her chest as she saw his shadow move. Her hand twitched as if to protect herself, but then her eyes adjusted, and she remembered. The cabin, the fire, the human. She stared at him through heavy eyelids. He did not speak. He only placed the log carefully and sat back down, his eyes locking with hers across the glow of the flames. No words passed, but something did. A silent message. He would not harm her. Not tonight. Her heart beat slower, and her breathing softened. She turned her face back into the blanket, her body giving up the fight. Sleep finally pulled her down, but it was not the sharp, restless sleep of fear she had always known. It was deeper, safer, though fragile. The soldier leaned his head back against the chair, exhaling slowly. He had chosen to remain in the hard seat rather than take the bed for himself. His muscles ached, but he did not move. He could not. Something told him that leaving her unguarded, even for a moment, was dangerous. Not because she was a threat, but because trust was a fragile thing. If she woke and found him gone, if she thought he had abandoned her, whatever small bridge had been built tonight would crumble. He watched her from the corner of his eyes. In the faint glow of the fire, she looked younger, almost childlike, though he knew she was not. There was innocence in the way she clutched the blanket, in the way her body curled as if afraid the warmth might be taken away. He wondered how long she had lived like this, hunted, cast aside, unwanted. He wondered what stories her scars would tell if she spoke his language. Time dragged slowly, the night stretching endlessly. At times, he caught himself drifting, his eyes growing heavy. But every time he felt sleep coming, he forced his body to wake. He had promised himself he would not fall asleep. Not tonight. Not with her here. He would watch until the sun rose, until the storm passed, until he knew for certain that she was just a girl seeking warmth and not a shadow wearing a mask. The hours crawled, and the storm began to weaken at last. The howls outside softened, replaced by the softer hiss of falling snow. The fire was still burning, the cabin still holding strong. And in the bed, she stirred again, murmuring something in her own tongue. He did not understand the words, but the sound was soft, tender, almost like a child whispering in a dream. For the first time in years, the soldier felt something stir in his chest, something he thought the war had killed long ago. A sense of peace. Strange, dangerous, fleeting, but real. He shook the thought away, gripping his rifle tighter. Peace was a luxury he could not afford, but still the feeling lingered, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. The alien girl shifted one last time, then settled into stillness. Why? Her breathing deep and steady. She had fallen into true sleep, trusting him enough to let her guard fall. That thought made his heart heavy. Trust was rare in these times. Trust could get you killed. And yet here it was, offered by someone who should have been his enemy. The firelight flickered one last time against her peaceful face. The soldier sat quietly, his mind caught between doubt and something softer, something he dared not name. The storm outside had not won tonight. Inside the cabin, warmth had claimed its fragile victory. And as the night stretched on, both alien and human, two lonely souls from two broken worlds, rested under the same roof, separated by silence, yet tied by survival. The first light of dawn slipped through the cracks of the cabin walls, touching the wooden floor with a pale glow. The fire had died down to soft embers, and the storm outside had become silent snow. The alien girl stirred slowly in the bed, her body wrapped tightly in the furs. She blinked as the brightness reached her eyes, confused for a moment, unsure of where she was. Then she remembered. The warmth, the fire, the human who had opened his door when no one else ever had. Her body felt lighter than it had in years, but her chest carried a strange heaviness. She sat up, the blanket sliding down her shoulders, and found the human soldier already awake. He was by the table, sharpening his knife, the sound of metal scraping against stone sharp and steady. His rifle leaned nearby, ready to be used in a heartbeat. His face was calm, but his eyes were watchful, serious as always. He had not forgotten she was an alien, and neither had she. He looked at her once, only briefly, before returning to his work. She wanted to speak, to say something that would explain who she was and why she had ended up at his door. But her language was not his, and his was not hers. Still, her heart pushed her to try. She placed a hand on her chest, as if to say, "Me," and whispered her name softly. Her voice cracked from weakness, but it carried. He lifted his eyes, frowning slightly, not understanding. She repeated the sound again, slowly, her name, a fragile gift in the silence. He studied her, then gave a small nod. It was not understanding, but it was acknowledgement. For someone like her, even that felt like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. She pointed at him then, her eyes asking silently for his name. He hesitated, then finally muttered, "Daniel." She repeated the word clumsily, her tongue shaping it with difficulty. He almost smiled at how awkwardly she said it, but he held his expression firm. For a moment, there was a thin bridge between them. Names, the simplest of things, had tied them together, but her chest still burned with something heavier. She pulled the blanket tighter around her body, her eyes lowering. She knew she had to tell him, even if he would not understand every word. He had a right to know why she had been wandering alone, half dead in the snow. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her words flowing in her own tongue, soft but filled with sorrow. He could not understand the sentences, but he watched her face, her gestures, her eyes. Slowly, painfully, he began to piece together her meaning. She pointed outward, toward the storm, then pressed her hand hard against her heart. Her voice broke as she continued, her hands trembling. She mimed being pushed away, mimed others turning their backs. Finally, she whispered a word again and again, a word heavy with pain, the tone sharp enough that even without translation, he felt it. Dirty. Daniel's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, listening more carefully. Her body shook as she continued, trying to show him the truth. She was not abandoned by accident. She was abandoned on purpose. Her people had rejected her, not because she was weak, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was different. Her bloodline was not pure. She was not worthy of their homes, their food, or even their beds. She had been left to die, not once, but every day she had been forced to wander the cold world alone. He gripped the knife harder, the sound of the metal against stone stopping. His soldier's mind was used to stories of enemies being cruel, but watching her explain, he realized this was not propaganda. This was truth carved into her soul. She was not lying. Her voice cracked with real hurt. Her eyes glistened with tears that she tried to blink away. She was not playing a role. She was not bait. She was broken. Daniel leaned back slowly, letting the weight of her confession sink in. She hugged herself tightly, lowering her head, ashamed even though she had done nothing wrong. She whispered more words, softer this time, as if speaking them hurt. Her lips trembled on the final sentence, and though he could not understand the words, he understood the meaning. "I never had a warm bed." Silence filled the cabin after that. Her breathing was unsteady, her shoulders rising and falling. She was afraid to look at him now, afraid he would see her as her own people saw her. Unworthy, dirty, less. Daniel sat quietly, his knife resting forgotten on the table. He wanted to say something, but no words in his language could cross the distance between them. Still, he felt something rising inside him, stronger than orders, stronger than the war that had defined his life. He saw her as she was, not as an enemy, not as a stranger, but as someone who had been denied the simplest kindness. Her eyes finally lifted, unsure, waiting for his judgment. Instead of anger or rejection, she found his steady gaze. He said nothing, but the silence was different this time. It was not cold or cautious. It was heavy with something new, something she could not name but felt deep inside her chest. Her tears spilled at last, silent drops rolling down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away, ashamed to cry in front of him. But he did not look away. He did not mock. He did not turn his back. His eyes stayed on her, firm and unshaken, as if telling her without words, "You are not nothing. Not here. Not to me." The cabin felt smaller now, the air thicker. The storm outside had ended, but inside something else had begun. She had shared her deepest wound, and he had not walked away. For her, that was more shocking than the coldest night or the cruelest rejection. For the first time in her life, she felt that someone had truly seen her. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling quietly. He was still a soldier, still cautious, still aware of the danger. But deep inside, he knew this morning had changed something. She was no longer just a stranger who had knocked on his door. She was something else now. A truth he could not ignore, a voice he could not silence. And though neither of them could speak the other's words, both understood one thing. Last night, she had found his bed. But today, in the quiet morning light, she had found something even more impossible. She had found a place in someone's eyes where she was not dirty, not unwanted, where she was simply alive and allowed to be. The morning silence did not last long. Daniel's soldier senses caught it first, the faint crunch of footsteps outside the cabin, muted under the snow. His head snapped toward the door, his hand instantly reaching for the rifle leaning against the wall. The alien girl froze where she sat, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her ears twitched, sharp, alert, her eyes widening with the same realization. Someone was out there. He raised a hand to her, a silent command, "Stay quiet." His body lowered, muscles tensed like a wolf ready to strike. He moved toward the door with careful steps, avoiding the creaky floorboards he knew too well. Outside, the footsteps grew louder, heavier, like boots crunching deep into ice. Not one pair, several. His jaw clenched. A patrol. The alien girl's heart pounded so hard she feared they would hear it through the walls. She knew that rhythm, those sounds. They were her people's soldiers. If they found her here, it would not just be her life at risk. It would be his too. They would call him a traitor, an enemy who had sheltered someone impure. The thought made her throat close with terror. Daniel pressed his back against the wall beside the door, his rifle raised, ready to fire if needed. But firing meant exposing himself. It meant the patrol would know a human was here. And alone, against a group, the cabin would not stand long. He tilted his head, listening hard. Voices broke through the storm's quiet. The language was alien, harsh yet fluid. Daniel could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. They were searching. The girl's body shook. She knew those voices. She had heard them before, filled with disgust and commands. They were not here for him. They were here for her. They must have tracked her steps through the snow, followed the trail of her weakness. Her blood went cold at the thought. Daniel glanced at her. She had curled into herself, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket, so tight her knuckles turned white. Her lips trembled as she mouthed words in her language, begging the gods or fate to keep the soldiers away. Daniel didn't need translation. He saw the terror in her eyes. He moved quickly, crossing the room and crouching in front of her. His voice was low, firm. "Quiet. Don't move." She nodded, though her body trembled so much it seemed impossible she could stay still. He pushed the bed slightly against the wall, then gestured for her to lie down, pulling the blankets over her so she looked like nothing but piled furs. She obeyed, curling small beneath the covers, her heart beating so loud she thought it might shake the wood itself. The footsteps stopped right outside the cabin. Then came a hard thud, someone knocking, or maybe trying the door. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. His eyes flicked to the door latch, then back to the fire. He let the flames burn steady, let the smoke rise natural. He wanted the cabin to look like nothing unusual, just a lone human soldier waiting out the storm. Another knock, louder this time. Then voices again, impatient, commanding. Daniel stood still, his rifle aimed at the door, every muscle locked in silence. The girl under the blankets bit her lip to keep from gasping. She remembered nights when these same voices had mocked her, when they had called her unclean, when they had left her to starve. If they found her now, they would drag her out, and they would kill him for sheltering her. The handle rattled, but the door did not open. Daniel had locked it well. He held his breath, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The voices outside argued, their tones sharp. Boots crunched again, moving slowly around the cabin. They were searching, circling, but not breaking in. Daniel knew why. The war had taught him this much. Patrols avoided unnecessary fights. Breaking into a human cabin risked a trap, risked a fight they didn't want. They would scan, they would listen, then move on, unless they heard something inside. The girl's body shook violently under the furs. She pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her lungs screamed for air, but she took shallow, tiny breaths, praying they would not hear. She closed her eyes, seeing flashes of her people's hatred, remembering being pushed into the snow, hearing the word dirty spat at her again and again. Outside, one of the soldiers shouted. The sound grew distant. The others followed. The crunch of boots faded, swallowed by the storm. Daniel stayed frozen in place for long minutes after, his rifle still raised, his ears straining. Only when silence truly returned did he lower the weapon. He exhaled, his breath heavy, his body slowly relaxing. He crossed the room and pulled back the blankets slightly. Two wide, tear-filled eyes stared up at him. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She had not even realized tears had slid down her cheeks. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. They're gone. She gasped finally, pulling in a full breath, her chest rising and falling fast. She sat up, clutching the blanket tight, as if it were the only thing holding her together. Her voice cracked as she whispered something in her language. A single word repeated again and again, her tone filled with both relief and fear. Daniel didn't understand the word, but he knew what it meant. Safe. He sat back, resting the rifle against the wall again, though his mind stayed sharp, knowing the danger was not gone forever. The patrol might return. They might leave marks. But for tonight, the storm had swallowed them. For tonight, the cabin was still theirs. She looked at him, her chest still heaving, her eyes wide with something beyond fear. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. She had been moments from being dragged back into a life of rejection and cruelty, and only his silence, his steadiness, had saved her. Daniel met her gaze, his own eyes steady, hard but not cold. He had chosen her survival. He had chosen to risk himself for her. And as the firelight flickered between them, she realized something she had never thought possible. Someone, even a human, had stood between her and the people who wanted her dead. The storm outside had softened to gentle snow, but inside the cabin, the air felt heavy, alive with a new weight. Fear had nearly broken them, but trust had been forged stronger in its place. And though both knew danger was not far, for now they breathed the same silence, their lives tied closer than before. The silence after danger was always the heaviest. Hours passed since the patrol's footsteps faded into the storm, but the memory of those boots crushing snow still echoed in their minds. The alien girl sat on the bed, her knees pulled close to her chest, the blanket wrapped tight around her small body. Her eyes had stopped leaking tears, but they were red, swollen from holding fear for so long. She had lived many nights in terror, but never had she felt so close to being dragged away again. Daniel sat near the fire, his rifle across his lap. His eyes stayed on the flames, but he knew she was watching him. He could feel the weight of her stare, filled questions she had no words to ask. He thought of the moment outside, the voices, the danger, the way she trembled under the blankets. A soldier should have thrown her out. A soldier should have cared only about his own survival. But he had chosen differently. He had chosen to shield her, to stand between her and her hunters. That choice could not be undone now. She shifted, the bed creaking softly. Her voice broke the silence, quiet and trembling, her own language spilling from her lips. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Gratitude. She pressed a hand against her heart, bowing her head slightly, then lifted her gaze back to him. For her, this was not just survival. This was something more. Something she had never known. To her, he was not just a soldier. He was the first being who had offered her warmth, protection, and dignity. Daniel looked at her long, holding her gaze. His own voice came low, steady. "You're safe here." She didn't know the words, but his tone carried across the barrier of language. She nodded once, slowly, clutching the blanket tighter. The night came again, but this time it felt different. The storm outside had quieted, leaving only soft snow drifting across the frozen world. The cabin, small and rough, seemed larger now with the fire glowing warmly. Still, trust was fragile, and both of them knew it. Daniel kept his rifle within reach, his instinct sharp. The girl lay back on the bed, curling under the furs, but her eyes did not close. She stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, her mind running wild with thoughts. She remembered her life before, the endless cold, the cruelty of her people, the word dirty thrown at her like a stone. She had slept on frozen ground, in empty barns, beneath trees covered in snow. Every night had been a fight against death, and every morning she had woken wondering if it would be her last. But now, here she was, lying in warmth she had never tasted before. It felt like living in a dream she was afraid would end if she dared to sleep too deeply. Her eyes shifted to him again. He had not left his chair. He looked tired, his face shadowed in the dim light, but his body stayed alert. He was protecting her, even now. The thought made her chest ache in a way she could not explain. At last, her voice broke the silence again. She whispered something soft, fragile. He turned his head toward her, confused. She repeated the word, slower, her hand patting the space beside her on the bed. He frowned, shaking his head. "No, you take it." But she insisted. She gestured again, her eyes steady. This time, her meaning was clear. The bed was large enough for both, and she was offering him to share it, not out of anything else, but out of a deep, simple truth. She did not want to be alone anymore. Daniel's chest tightened. A soldier sharing a bed with an alien? It was unthinkable. Every rule screamed against it. But then he saw her face, the way her eyes glimmered not with seduction or tricks, but with loneliness. She had lived a lifetime of rejection, of cold, of being unwanted. For her, sharing warmth was not about breaking rules. It was about finally belonging, even if for a single night. He hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. But slowly, he stood, leaving the chair and moving toward the bed. He set the rifle within reach, leaned it against the wall, then lowered himself onto the other side of the bed. The furs shifted under his weight, the warmth of their bodies spreading between them. For a long while, they lay stiff, not moving, not speaking. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Then, little by little, her breathing slowed, her body relaxing against the safety beside her. She shifted slightly, her back brushing against his arm. Her muscles tensed for a second, but when he did not move away, she allowed herself to stay. Daniel lay on his side, staring at the ceiling, his mind restless. He knew this was more dangerous than any battle. Letting her into his bed meant letting her into his heart, even if only by an inch. But when he listened to her soft breathing, when he felt the slight warmth radiating from her fragile frame, he understood something. He had been alone for so long, carrying only orders and silence. Tonight, for the first time, he was not alone. Her eyes closed slowly, her lips parting as she whispered words in her tongue, soft as a lullaby. He didn't know what they meant, but the sound calmed him, easing the storm in his chest. It was as if she was thanking him one last time before sleep claimed her. The snow outside buried the world in silence, but inside the cabin, the two of them shared warmth no storm could touch. An alien who had never known kindness, and a soldier who had forgotten what it meant to protect more than orders, now lay under the same roof, in the same bed. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring. Danger, betrayal, or perhaps hope. But for this night, their destinies were tied together. And as the fire dimmed, leaving only the glow of embers, the alien girl's last thought before drifting into sleep was simple and clear, more powerful than any fear. She had never had a warm bed, not once in her life, until now, until him.